Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the October CARC Data Facing Track call. I'm Galen Collier and I'm co-hosting this call with Deb McCaffrey. Today, to start off, just some announcements. In fact, let me share very quickly my browser window. Really, the main announcements that I want to share are those of the upcoming calls, the upcoming CARC calls. If you take a look at the CARC website at carc.org, there are a number of events posted there. And if you want to see a longer list of the events, you can go to View All Events. You can see that we have the researcher facing call coming up in just a couple of days. We've got a membership meeting. And just FYI, into November and December, we do plan to continue with the data facing track calls. We expect to have one in November and in December. So if you have a chance, please visit that website and get some of those events on your calendar. All right. And with that, I will hand it over to Deb for introductions and to get things going.
Hello, everyone. So today we're going to talk about electronic lab notebooks. Oh yes, thanks Christina. She just pasted the call document in chat. So you can go there to sign in, and also we'll kind of be putting relevant links and questions and notes in that doc. But yeah, so we're talking about electronic lab notebooks today. We're going to do a panel-ish sort of presentation. So today we have with us Doreen Nesdell from the libraries at the University of Utah. She is their administrator for their lab notebook, and she also helps with data management, federal policies, all that sort of stuff around data. And then I'm actually going to be talking today. I'm Deb McCaffrey. I work for the hospital and medical school at the University of Michigan. And I'm just a general research facilitator for everything there. We have Tobin Magel from University of Wisconsin-Madison Research Data Services team. She is their research data management lifecycle subject matter expert. And then finally, my colleague Steve Gendler, also from Michigan. He works on our applications team that also manages our lab notebooks. All right, so now I will hand it to Doreen to get started.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Look at them. Does it look okay?
I'm seeing the notes view, not the presentation view.
Yeah, I'm hitting the, there it goes.
There.
Great, okay. Well, hi everybody, and thank you, Deb, and thank you for organizing this webinar on electronic laboratory notebooks. Like this page, ELNs are a busy place, a busy space. So I describe ELNs as having two layers, the data layer and the people layer. This is the data layer. This is where the raw data can be entered into the ELN along with the data from any of the instrumentation in the lab. Images can also be entered, but since most ELNs are now browser-based, there are no TIFFs that can be entered into ELNs. Researchers can manipulate the data and perform calculations. Most ELNs do include numerous tools for manipulating the data. Dotmatics even includes visualization tools, but make sure you know what's going on your campus. Here at the University of Utah, we have the Ski Institute, which is a scientific computing and imaging institute. So we don't need visualization tools. We just ask people at the Ski Institute to work with us. Okay, these days, data needs to be shared, and so the data can be deposited in a data repository. But remember, since we do have data repositories, We can also extract data from the repositories and bring them into the ELNs. So this is the people layer. ELNs allow for communications among all members of a research group, virtually and asynchronously. So at this time when we're all working from home or social distancing in labs, trying to set up schedules so too many people aren't in the lab at one time, ELNs are great. Provenance is a record of who did what and when. Also an audit trail, okay? All entries are date and time stamped, and the person's name and the person's name can be electronically signed. This validates the work and is needed for any FDA or patent research. And it's also can help when there are disputes on what happened when. ELNs have varying degrees of security, depends upon which one you buy into as to how much security you have. And it depends upon your university's policy as to which one you should be selecting. We selected LabArchives because of the security. Okay, so a little history. Prior to the year 2000, chemical and pharmaceutical corporations were developing complex electronic systems to manage their research and their workflow. It was a way of reducing costs and increasing efficiency. But the problem was that the FDA and the Patent Office did not accept electronic signatures and documentation. So the corporations were a hybrid world, part electronic and part print. Interstate commerce in the United States and also international commerce, it was struggling because of this lack of acceptance of electronic signatures and documents. And finally, in the year 2000, the US Congress passed legislation legalizing electronic signatures and documents. A number of other countries signed on to their own legalization of electronic signatures and documents about the same time. And to date, we have more than 60 nations who have passed legislation legalizing electronic signatures and documents. So corporations were now able to use their systems, and a few have developed systems that actually became separate from the corporation they were working for, and they started selling these ELNs to other corporations. We at the university, we were looking at ELNs, and we had a couple of researchers who were struggling with their large groups managing them. And so we brought in a couple of these corporate ELNs, and we found out that they cost $40,000 just to set up one lab. And we have, what, hundreds of labs on campus, and it was $1,000 per person per year to maintain these structures. So what happened at that point is that these corporate ELNs learned that they cannot get into the academic field until they change their ELNs, and we learned, well, we're not going to get into this anytime soon. But what happened was, in about 2006, the development of cloud-based computing and web-based apps came about, and that brought about electronic laboratory notebooks on the web. And this is the period where I started, the period which I always refer to as the wild, wild west of ELNs. Whoops, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Wild, wild west. Okay, so one of the first ones I looked into was Sparklets. It was actually one of the early ones, and it was I was asked to look into it because a faculty member wanted to use it for class, but I found out it was clunky. But there was no information on the website about who developed it, what type of security they had, or where even the servers were that was holding the data. So I emailed the webmaster, and I was told that they did not really think anyone needed the information. People would use Sparklets and see how great it was. They bragged that NIH was using it. Well, actually, NIH had a few labs testing it, and it went nowhere. Another early one was LabGuru. It was developed by a grad student in Israel. It was based on inventory and expanded to include a few tools. It became popular because it was picked up by Nature's incubator, Discovery Science, and you saw articles on the LabGuru in Nature magazine. But the problem was it never had a real audit trail. And because it was based on inventory, our people weren't interested in it. SERP was another early system, a real early system. And it was taken over by Iris Note just to increase its marketing. We had it demonstrated here and people really liked it. We thought we were going to get a contract, but you know what? It disappeared. And that happened a lot during this time period. So we never did talk about a site license, but what happened, we found out later, is the developer became seriously ill and his wife pulled the plug on the whole project. But eventually what happened was, we found out, was that SURF was picked up by LabAlley, and you can now get SURF. Well, we didn't know that at the time. So LabArchives appeared in 2010. They had a business plan. They understood security. The developers had previous experience selling to academia. That's because they were the people who developed reference manager and also reference work. And so we worked with them, and I wanted to develop a pilot study because I had no idea what was going to happen on campus if I introduced an ELN, what problems we were going to run into. So I developed a pilot project. And what we learned from that project, well, first thing is, like most universities, the University of Utah had old buildings and new buildings and everything in between. Not all labs are set up for computers, and if they are, then usually the computers are away from the bench and sometimes in a different room. So I found out, we in the library, we're spoiled since our computers are provided to us and upgraded every 5 years. In research, too often people have to supply their own computers. This can be an issue, and this also is an issue with environmental health and safety, because in some labs, whatever's in the lab stays in the lab, so you can't take the computer home, or your laptop, your iPad, whatever. Also, security became an issue because you couldn't take your laptop home. That was actually resolved because the university implemented a secure VM on campus, and everybody is involved with that. So LabArchives does not support code. And too many projects these days have some modeling and or simulation component. That was an issue during the pilot. But LabArchives is now working to integrate Jupyter into LabArchives. Interdisciplinary, I really got annoyed with reps who kept telling me their ELNs were interdisciplinary. That just doesn't mean anything anymore. Yeah, it's interdisciplinary. LabArchives is interdisciplinary for STEM subjects. That's about it. We did have folks in social science trying to experiment using LabArchives, but they're used to using DDI, Data Documentation Initiative, and we need to get an ELN that incorporates DDI for them to be able to use an ELN. And so it takes time for people to adjust to typing instead of writing. In labs where the computers are not at the bench, researchers would write out calculations and notes, pieces of paper, and then they would take a picture with their smartphone, and LabArchives has an app on a smartphone, and you take a photo and it goes directly into LabArchives. So that helped a little bit. So when I teach LabArchives workshop, I tell folks that if they have a grad student or postdocs working and they're towards finishing up and looking for another position, etc., trying to get them to use LabArchives is a waste of time. They're a little too busy and their mind isn't on it. So what we started telling people was, as new people into the lab, get them started on LabArchives from the beginning, and then everybody eventually will be using LabArchives. And it does take about 3 months for a lab to be comfortable not only using LabArchives, but any of these ELNs. It takes a bit to set it up, to make sure you set it up correctly and get everybody comfortable using all the tools. So faculty who are initiating any ELNs, they really need to find the time when they do not have too much work to do so they can integrate LabArchives into their labs. To assist researchers in organizing their LabArchives account, I tell them to sit down and plot out each person in the group and the project and experiments they are each responsible for. Okay, indicate the people who are working together, and then those people who need the end results of a certain person's work. Okay, then decide how you want to organize the notebooks. And usually it's either by project or by person. I also do talk about descriptors and how to develop a data dictionary. Then I explain that term metadata. Okay, I said security is a big thing. at the University of Utah. Well, one of the reasons is in 2010, the NSA announced that they would be building a data south of Salt Lake City. Ever since, we have been subjected to attacks by both domestic and international hackers. So all data must be secure. And as the slide indicates, security is more than just technology. It includes a secure location and an understanding of which people have access. So far, I've been able to have our IT security folks declare that LabArchives is appropriate for research requiring HIPAA compliance and also ITAR. ITAR is International Trade in Arms Regulations. Matter of fact, LabArchives is the only storage space on campus appropriate for ITAR. I'm still working on DFARS, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to follow ITAR. It's going to be the only place on campus where you can do this kind of research. So what's happening in the ELN world? Well, Research and Markets in 2019 came out and said that the market will be worth over $600 million by the year 2025. So ELNs, they're not going to go anywhere. We are going to be using them on not only my campus, but everybody's campus and in all the sciences, all the STEM areas. Okay, we're presently working with the first generation of ELNs, so they can only improve. Yes, there's a lot of things that I see that I keep nudging LabArchives. Hey, you really need to do this, and they know it, and they're working towards a second generation of ELNs. That listing of global ELN players is a little deceptive. So some of the companies like LabArchives, that's the only thing they're selling is the one ELN. You look at Perkin Elmer, they have an entire suite of products for both corporate and academia. And also what's happening in this area are the science gateways. They date back to the 2003 Atkins report, where they first described the term cyber infrastructure. And NSF has been supporting them and building them ever since. A science gateway is a community developed set of tools, applications, and data that are integrated via a portal or a suite of applications. They are subject specific, not like a ELN where more than one subject can use it. I work with AgBioData. This is a group of portals for genomic research involving agricultural plants and animals. And these portals, make sure everybody understands, these portals do not have to be in the sciences. There's one of the portals that's actually in philosophy. How people are going to go towards ELNs versus these communities just depends upon the type of research they're doing. Oops. And thank you. If there are any questions, we'll answer them at the end, and I'll turn it over back to Deb.
All right, thank you, Dory. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the products that are out there, because as Dory mentioned, there's a zillion of them. But luckily, some of the work's already been done for you. There's a link to this website in the call document. It's from the Harvard Biomedical Data Management Group, but it's just, they spent some effort looking into a whole bunch of different notebooks and just kind of compiling them for everybody. So they've got this great website. This is the landing page here. They've got what's called this comparison grid in Google Sheets, where you can just easily compare all the features of the notebooks they looked at. But then they also have more detail from each product. If there's like, you look at the matrix and one of them looks interesting, you can go look for more detail. And what's really nice is a lot of the data was vendor provided. It wasn't just like looking at all the vendor websites, which is awesome. But then just to go over a few different particular products, there's kind of two large categories for notebooks. There's domain-specific ones and then not domain-specific. So a couple of the domain-specific ones. There's a benchling, which Doreen also noted as one of the big ones. This one is specifically for life science. So it's got a whole bunch of tools for like antibody developing proteins, all that kind of stuff that's integrated right in the notebook. So it's really great, particularly for life science notebooks. There's the LabVantage platform, which is a notebook plus a LIMS plus some other stuff. And this one is more about biological sample inventory. So we actually have this at our med school to manage hospital research samples. So that's great if you have a lot of sampling involved with your research. Go away. Sorry, the Zoom bar is in the way of my tabs. There we go. There's MBook, which says it right up there. It's designed by chemists for chemists. So that's a few of the domain-specific ones, but then there are quite a number of just kind of more general notebooks that aren't meant to be domain-specific. We saw SciNote. SciNote is one of them. This one in particular, an interesting feature is that it is also a task manager. So that's kind of, when you're looking at notebooks, that's kind of what you want to look at, like what are the interesting features and will they meet your needs? But then by far, I've noticed that LabArchives is the most popular one, even despite some of the challenges that Doreen mentioned. We also run across those challenges. Like, people tell us all the time they don't want to take their computer into lab and get like harmful chemicals on it. So that's definitely a problem. And she did mention that LabArchives does not handle code well. I have found some other general notebooks that do integrate with things like GitHub. So there are notebooks out there that can handle code. All right, so that's just a flavor of what's out there. And now I'm going to hand it over to Tobin to talk a bit about how to support a lab notebook.
Excuse me, thanks, Deb. Gonna share my screen, hopefully. Oh, sorry, I just got a new laptop, so it's like making me tell it that I can share my screen and Zoom and things. So. All right, I think I should have it now. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. All right, so there are a couple of different ways to run an ELN service. I think we have representation here from places that get a site license and just sort of say anyone with a campus ID can log in and use this thing, versus places like UW-Madison, where if you want anyone who does research on campus can use the electronic lab notebook at no cost, but you kind of have to go through an onboarding process to use it. So the UW-Madison ELN service team is kind of based in our central IT department. I'm the research data lifecycle manager in that group and also the ELN service team. And this is in the research cyber infrastructure group, who's led by Jan Cheatham, who I think I saw on this call. This group has partners from around campus. So there's about, less than a dozen people on this team. But other members of the team are in central IT or the university libraries. We also have representation from WARF, which is our intellectual property arm of campus. So making sure that that complies with what they need to do for patenting, and also local IT in the departments and colleges around campus. So that gives us a pretty broad base of experience from around campus, and all of these people have insight into how we run our service. We're the first line of access and support for the ELN. We take care of the licensing of the platform. We add new users when a lab that's already using the notebook has new people join the lab. We onboard new labs to the service. We also promote the service through websites and events on campus, or I guess they're online now. And we also provide basic help and support for the ELN, as well as help people when they have trouble logging on and things like that. Just so to give you an idea of the level of usage we have around campus, we have about 2,800 users, and that includes anyone who has ever logged into the service or has ever signed up for an account on the service. Some of those people have left the university, but I don't have a good way to sort that at the moment. Over 120 research labs are actively using it, so that means that they've logged in more than a few times over the course of a month. We have almost 1,500 notebooks and 3 terabytes of data, which is great. And on the right is just a breakdown of the different colleges and schools on campus that are using it and how much they're using it. So I mentioned that when new labs want to use the ELN, we have an onboarding process that they go through. So essentially, they go through our contact form and say, hey, I'm a new PI who wants to use the ELN. We email them back and say, that's great, we added you to give you access, but we really find that people are more successful using this tool when they get an onboarding. And that's true because our platform currently is LabArchives, and there's a lot of hidden features in the ELN. Last year, or the year before, we did a survey of ELN users, and we got a lot of complaints of like, LabArchives doesn't do blah, but it actually does. It's just that the user didn't know how to access that feature. So in the onboarding, we talk about why you would want to use an ELN in general, how to get access to our service, and then we go through things that are more specific to LabArchives, like how they structure their data, how to share the data with collaborators, and also, excuse me, how to back up their data locally so they can have access to it even if they don't have access to the internet at the moment. So we talk about things like, I think Doreen covered a lot of this, but LabArchive or lab notebooks generally contain data and kind of context around it. And I like to describe that like a chocolate chip cookie, where the chocolate chips are the data. That seems like the exciting part, but it's just not the same without the cookie dough context around it. And then we talk to them about like different ways of doing it. Like when I was in grad school, it was fully analog, but people are shifting more to fully digital these days, especially now that people are working remotely. And then I talk about what LabArchives can do specifically. So store data, record context, link things together, which is really cool, version control, which is awesome, collaboration, so that you could, because the access controls are really granular, and also protect against loss because everything is stored in the notebook and nothing can ever really be deleted. So to get access, users will fill out this contact form on our website. So I can show you the website really quickly. Right here, so they just click this contact form and say if they were a new lab, they'd say that they're a PI, and I can say that my name is Tobin M, put my email here, pick a college, and add a department, and say, I don't want to tell you who else is in my lab right now. I'm going to submit that. So all of that information that we just collected from the user goes into a ticketing system where we can collect the information, verify that they're a PI, and then add them to our master contact list. So that kind of gives us the demographic information for who's using the notebook, but then we also add their name to a system on our end that uses the software called Grouper. So this is like a group management software for distributed organizations that's made by Internet 2. And then Grouper allows whoever we have in our Grouper group to the ability to log into LabArchives. So if they don't go through this process before and they try to log in with their university credentials, they get kicked back to an error message that says that your university hasn't approved you to use this service yet. So yeah, so we already talked about the onboarding stuff. During the onboarding session, we actually give them more of a detailed overview of the notebook. So like how to add users to your notebook, how to add data, showing them version control features and stuff like that. But since we're trying to keep this a little bit platform agnostic in this presentation. I'm not going to go through any of that. But we also make sure that they know how to get help if they run into a problem as they're using the notebook. So we link to the support that LabArchives provides online, but we also link to our web portal and our local knowledge base documents that get in kind of the intricacies of local data policy and things like that. And kind of the reason why we chose to go with a mediated method is to comply with the campus data policy. As Jan was setting up the ELN service, she worked really closely with the Vice Chancellor for Research on campus. And that was one of the things that they wanted, was that they had some control over who was using the notebook and that the data would stay with the university and be stewarded by the PI. So kind of to get to the point of this section, kind of to onboard or to not to onboard, there are pros and cons to both approach. Kind of anecdotally, users typically fare better. We know that the labs that we've talked to about the notebook and help them with it generally use it more. And that could either be the fact that they're more committed to learning how to do it and requested an onboarding versus the onboarding actually making them engage with it more. But all of this work with the labs one-on-one does take time. I'm really lucky that I'm not the only person who has to do this. I have partners from around campus who also do onboardings and take help tickets. So that's one of the advantages that I have where I am. But it also lets us know who our users are. So we know what they're doing with the notebook and how they use it. So we can better communicate to LabArchives what the needs of the users are. But knowing who the users are and being able to generate usage statistics and show different departments and colleges who's using the notebook and why they should care about it also takes a lot of administrative upkeep. So we actually have to do things by hand to add people access to logging in and things like that and to generate usage reports, although we're in the process of automating a lot of that. And the other thing that's happened recently is within the last year, we've gone through a risk assessment to store ePHI in the electronic lab notebook with our local cybersecurity. And having some of these things in place already just for our normal service really set us up for success to be able to do the reporting and the checking that needs to be done to satisfy security requirements on campus. But kind of the biggest con here is that especially with the HIPAA process, there are some delays between a user expressing interest in the ELN and being able to use it. But with the regular service, that only takes about a day or two for the most part. So people seem to be satisfied with that. So yeah, that is all I had. So I guess I will pass it on to Steve to talk about licensing.
All right, thank you very much. So I was asked to talk about sponsorship, selection, and what it took to get a site license going here at University of Michigan. One of the first things we did is I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, and I asked her if she needed an electronic laboratory notebook, and she said, no, I don't work in a laboratory. Oh, well, if you had a place to store data, annotate data, you could easily collaborate, you could have an audit trail for any changes, et cetera, would you be interested in that? And she said, yeah, as a data scientist, I would really be interested in that. So one of the first things we did is stop calling it an ELN and start calling it an ERN, an electronic research notebook. The next thing we did is we're lucky enough to have a fair amount of hierarchy, he said. Lucky enough to have hierarchy? Anyway, we had a place to go to try and sell the notion of having an electronic research notebook. So we were able to go to an IT group in the med school that allowed me to get in touch with all the associate chairs of research in the clinical department, many of the chair people of basic sciences as well. So that was very useful, but probably the most important thing that we did in terms of getting the ERN at University of Michigan was executive sponsorship. We happened to get a very, for lack of a better term, powerful executive sponsor who was willing to help us sell the tool into the faculty hierarchy and into the management in my division, HITS, the Health Information Technology and Services Department. So George Mashur, who's got positions in the medical school office of research, the campus office of research, having that kind of name behind getting the ERN in was super important. When it came time for selection, one of the first things we did is we ripped off University of Wisconsin. I mean, no, wait. So Jan Cheatham was kind enough to send us her RFP, and that was the basis for the RFP that University of Michigan wrote and issued. Everything at U of M has to go out on the street through the Department of Purchasing. It's a public institution. So we had a fairly extensive RFP that started with the kindness of UW. We didn't have a lot of vendors respond. We sent it out, and so this was 5 years ago. We didn't get a lot of responses, and we ended up doing a pilot with two of them, RSpace and LabArchives. We did a pilot with 15 researchers, and those 15 researchers unanimously picked LabArchives. In my opinion, the infrastructure of RSpace was superior to LabArchives, but the user interface was much easier to use, and we ended up picking using weighted criteria, which is of course required as part of the RFP. We ended up picking LabArchives. We also used SurveyMonkey and had some directed questions to the researchers to kind of, well, to gather their votes and take each of the questions and fit them into that weighted selection grid. It made it relatively easy. We were trying to decide whether or not to just license it for the medical school and the dental school, who was collaborating with us on this, or the whole campus. And frankly, it was less money to do all three campuses of the University of Michigan that are in Ann Arbor, Flint, and Dearborn than to just do the two schools alone. All right, that's about what I think. You want to hear about sponsorship and selection? Of course, there'll be more questions later. Deb, this is your slide.
Yep. This is just a quick plug. The LabArchives platform is actually available through the Internet to Net Plus program. So while we're trying to not bias this towards any one platform, LabArchives has got a nice hold on the market. So, so if you are an Internet 2 member, you can work with them to get licensing for LabArchives. Cool. So that's the end of the talk. Are there any questions? Or if anybody else has their own ELNs at their universities, go ahead and just talk about your experience.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Doreen talked about provenance, and somebody else mentioned that it's almost impossible to delete I think it was Tobin, that it was impossible to delete what you already put in there. That is a very nice feature that is not very common. Can you elaborate on that? I think for my case, I work in the field. I do agriculture, and so sometimes, for example, spreadsheets, if you change something in the wrong line, you lose that data. So I would like to hear more about that and what experiences you have and problems or alternatives to that. Thank you.
I can start that. We use LabArchives, so they give you unrestricted storage space. We even use our university's U-Box integrated with LabArchives, and within U-Box it's unrestricted storage space. So I don't know when the cloud is going to fall, but yeah, nothing is deleted. You can delete things and put it into a trash bin, which is, you know, in the LabArchives, but nothing is deleted out of that because they need that to create the audit trail. So everything you delete, everything you do is in that audit trail. And one of the things I realize is that LabArchives audit trail, if you're working in LabArchives and you realize, you come to a situation where, you know, what I did 2 weeks ago looks great. I should actually repeat it here. You can go to the audit trail and grab it and bring it in. Okay, so that's great for the audit trail. And I noticed when I was playing with LabGuru versus LabArchives, LabGuru, you cannot do that. It'll take 48 hours for them to give you the audit trail, number one. And number two, when we did get the audit trail, it was a lot of gobbledygook. We couldn't do anything with it. So you do have to play with the audit trail of each ELN to make sure it is something you want and something the researchers want. The audit trail is the provenance. It is who did what and when. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I have some other questions. At least one other question. I'm Joanna Lovelock from Harvard Medical School, and we are in the process of selecting an ELN, and we've been through our initial selection, a proof of concept, if you like, and we're about to start piloting eLab Journal. I was wondering whether anyone else had experience with eLab Journal.
Anybody in the audience?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we just so you know, we kind of, as part of the proof of concept, we selected that over RSpace and over LabArchives. Mainly with the LabArchives, a couple of things was the user interface, which I think you've already mentioned is not stellar. But the other thing was that it was difficult to integrate with other products and difficult to integrate with institutional file store. And we found that both RSpace and eLab Journal had, you know, more functionality in that area. My other question I have actually is about the you showed the ELN matrix early on. I'm actually responsible for maintaining that page. And, we've been having discussions lately about that page because there's a lot of information there to maintain, and some of it is not entirely up to date. And we've been talking about, you know, cutting it down to a smaller size and getting rid of, you know, just keeping the ones that we knew were the more popular ones, or the ones that we actually had useful within HMS. As anyone, I mean, I don't want to be pulling away, you know, something that is useful to other people. I wonder what other people's thoughts were on that.
This is Doreen again. Can you maybe put out a notice to this group or RDAP and say, does anybody want to help us maintain it? Instead of just people at Harvard maintain it.
Okay, that's a good thought. I will put that past our director and see what he thinks of that. Thank you.
I think RDAP might be interested, so definitely contact us.
I will do that.
I have a question for Joanna. What is the provenance structure in lab space? it's compatible or comparable to what the lab archives has?
Yeah, it's it's very comparable. You know, when we did, there were about half a dozen products, I would say, that had very comparable functionality, and it came down to things like an important one for us was being able to integrate with institutional file store and integrate with other products, but you know, they were our critical factors, if you like, but as far as the auditing and such, I think there were probably, you know, all the top products that we looked at were all very similar.
Any other questions from anybody? I don't see any questions in our Google Doc and none in the chat.
That's surprising.
Yeah,
Can I ask one more question?
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, I got there first. Oh, hi, Massey.
Hi, no problem.
Yeah, one question I had was, are you going to share that presentation?
We can put the links to anything in the doc.
Okay,
If
that'd be
they're,
great.
on Google. Yep.
Thank you.
It's a quick question. Marcia Crasas here from Harvard. Also, just wonder if anybody from the audience has experience supporting more than one ELN per university, and the challenges associated with that, or or maybe the benefits associated with that. That would be great if anybody has that experience. As you know, it's difficult to find one that suits everybody, so that's why I was wondering.
So we did not. I'm only trying to fill in because nobody's hopped in on that. We thought about that very hard. Integration between notebooks is pretty impossible, at least when we were looking at it 5 years ago. So what we did, one of the ways we sold it is we said the ERN is a collaboration play as much as it is a data provenance play. And if you can't integrate the notebooks, it makes it much more difficult if you're trying to do collaboration across two large platforms. So we kind of said to the people who weren't happy with LabArchives, I'm sorry, this is what the campus is going to offer for free, because it would make collaboration impossible if there was more than one.
We were kind of in the same boat where we only offer one for the most part. And we picked LabArchives because it is pretty discipline agnostic. But we do have users on campus who are using Benchling or using other ELNs, but they're covering the cost on their own. But we do have, like, the chemistry department has bought an ELN specifically for chemistry called Signals, just because that was a strong preference on their part. And one of our ELN team members is managing that, but we don't centrally support it monetarily.
So the other ELN we have on campus is RedCat, which was designed specifically for clinical research initially, but it has broadened it. We even have people on campus using it for their mouse colonies. That is sponsored by the bioinformatics group. It's on our CHPC platform, so it's secure. And that's the only one we have on campus. And like in Tobin, at Tobin's University, we do have some people in different departments who have bought into their own ELNs. One of the things about LabArchives is that if you are collaborating with people on other campuses, they on the other campus can still use that instance of LabArchives, which is another feature that made sure that we would buy into it.
From a business perspective, LabArchives is actually a great vendor to work with. They are very responsive to feedback. Like usually if we suggest something, it's on their roadmap next quarter. It's pretty great. Very refreshing after some of the antagonistic relationships.
So I have another question. One of the issues that we still have, really, we haven't found a good solution for, is exporting and importing, because I'm sure lots of heads nodding. There's no industry standard on how you can import data. Have any of you started to think through a solution to that problem?
We discussed this 5 years ago when we were dealing with both RSpace and LabArchives, and they both told us they don't want to lose control of the data. That is to say, if you export it and then bring it back in, the provenance, the control isn't ours anymore, and so it's very difficult for us as vendors to wrap our head around servicing that export and import. Now, you can export data out of LabArchives to a PDF. You can also ask the company to export it as a YAML marked up export file. But when it comes to PDF and YAML, there aren't very many other vendors that can parse it.
Yeah, I wonder, actually, that might be something that we might need to work together on, pushing the vendors to have some kind of standard on importing, because it isn't really in any of their interests to make the data easily exported and imported into another product.
I have some experience on the clinical side, and the way we were able to pull that off, this goes back like 4,000 years ago, is that there was a standards institute, so that there was a neutral party that said, okay, here's how we label stuff, and that's HL7. So there was, the vendors could collapse to one standard that they could participate in. If there's anything like that on the research side, I just don't know it.
Well, if anyone is interested, this would be like a perfect topic for a CARC interest group if anybody would like to start up for this topic. That's also a possibility.
Any other questions? I just want to draw attention to what Mercy put in the chat about RSpace. If you didn't catch that, she had what may be an important comment in the chat about RSpace, handling, importing, and exporting.
Yes, I can second that RSpace definitely have put a lot of effort into that, and seems to be, from my discussions with them, it seems to be definitely something that is important to them. The problem is that working with other vendors is, you have to, as Stephen said, something like an HL7 standard, but for ELNs is I kind of think what something we have to move towards.
Yeah, this is Marcia. I agree. I wonder if through RDA or some organization like that, it could be interesting to create a to have build some incentive for thinking of standard. I mean, to make it an actual standard takes a long time, but at least a best practice of some common fields or some common protocol or some formats to export.
I would even throw into that not just standards between notebooks, but standards between instrumentation and notebooks that would allow integration with laboratory instruments and notebooks. That's more than just watching a text file and throwing it into a folder. That would take a lot of effort, but I think maybe the notebook manufacturers would say, oh, that would make us pretty attractive if we could integrate with instruments easier.
Ooh, there's a group that's halfway there. Oh, what is it? Data Curation Network? They were here a few months ago. But they're generating data primers, which is like just best practices for curating types of data. That sounds like a perfect group to collaborate with on your idea, Steve. But yeah, if people are seriously want to put together a group to start on something like this, let me know. The coordinator's email for this track is df-coordinators@carc.org. Just email us. We could get something together. I see Lauren Michael's here. She's one of the co-PIs on this project. We could figure out something to do.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we're at the end of our hour. Let me ask if there are any further questions. Please go ahead, even though the call is ending, go ahead and post additional questions that come to your mind in our Google Doc. That could be very helpful. And we will definitely come back to the Google Doc and get answers for those questions. I just want to remind everyone that we do plan to continue having the data facing track calls in November and December, November 3rd and December 1st. And also the recordings for these data facing track calls are available in the CARC YouTube channel, which is, there's a link for that posted in the Google Doc.
And we just got our customized URL. Yay!
All right, well, let me thank our speakers very much for your time and sharing what you had to share with everybody, and thank everybody for the time and joining us for this conversation. It's been very productive, and I think the conversation is going to carry on beyond this call. With that, I will end our session. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.